Hello, everybody. I realized right before I was about to start that I had forgot to put up chat, but now I have that done, so I'm a couple minutes late. There's Quindy, and I don't know if I have any more preamble. I'm going to continue painting Marina the Overladen Henchwoman, who's the mini of the month. So that's the one that you get as a gift with purchase. But you can just buy it too if you want. Hey, Bob and Julie. And it is also one that is 3D printed for everyone. Everyone's copy is 3D printed, which was also true of last month's Wizard. And I have a video up on my YouTube channel where I tried to take a close look at the surface, and then not last week, but the week before. And this will be up on Reaper's YouTube channel. I took a look at it on the show and also went through like how I prep that kind of material, which is very similar to resin for painting. And then since I'd done all that prep, I thought we could go ahead and paint another copy of her. But I would try to do a similar color scheme, but in a bit more of a quick paint friendly fashion. Now, if you're seeing some shininess here, I only noticed this a couple days ago. Apparently last week when I was doing the metallics version, I got some metallics on the non-metallic metal version on a place that isn't metal anyway. So I will have to fix that, but hopefully that won't be too much of a problem. Other than that is one of the areas that I painted the way I will paint today. So this is as far as I got last week, which is, I would say, definitely not even 50% of the surface area of the miniature is finished. So do I have a hope of finishing this week? It is suspenseful because if you've been here before, you know I'm not the fastest painter, particularly when I have to talk at the same time. But I have a secret weapon, and my secret weapon is I'm going to do something like this. So this was a miniature that I painted in a monochromatic, black and white, for Halloween. But you can do this as kind of an underpainting idea as well. Like, it would be possible for me to take this miniature and take thin down, transparent but intense colors and paint it over, you know, some of these areas. I mean, the cloak wouldn't change a lot if I did that. I could possibly do something, but you know, I could paint over all of this and add color. And underpainting is a thing. If you zenithal highlighting, where you start with a spray black and then you spray white from the direction of the light, that is a form of underpainting. And painting in black and white, or which they call grisaille in traditional art. There's Brunei, which is doing browns, and Verdaccio is doing it with greens, which was popular, I think, with the old masters for skin, like because skin has reddish tones, using green in the underpainting in the shadows gets that complementary color mojo working. So that is what I did on this miniature, because there's a lot of stuff. So even on the one that I painted for Ron, not the bag, not the rope, and not that, and not the wood. So it's not, I'm going to do more things this way today, but I did like the leather boots and shoes, the pouch, I think the quiver, the other pouch, the scabbard, possibly something else that I'm not remembering. I use this method for, which is I can try and add all the texture and the shadows and the highlights kind of at the same time on a bunch of areas with one color mix, because that'll be a lot quicker to work with. And where are my little things? So that is the idea. But so these are the colors I used on the web store copy, the one that's for Ron. And this is essentially a yellow, blue, pink, or red. Pink and red are the same thing. Color scheme. And then this is the color selection that I used to do that underpainting thing that I was talking about. I was kind of aiming for something like burnt umber. Burnt umber is a popular color to do this with. I think I've maybe got something a little colder. If you use a true gray, it's going to give you a different impression than if you use like a warm brown or a cool brown or whatever. And I use Rogue Shadow, which when I was picking up my paints this morning, I'm like, oh, is that... I can't remember if that was like just a special edition paint or if it is widely available. I may not have even pulled it because of this. So I thought I would try to just pick colors that are currently available. So I've picked warm browns that are like kind of similar. I mean, it's pretty similar, but this would be a slightly different color. But then the other colors I painted on this figure are slightly different colors. So this is the two skin mixes. I actually wanted to add even more yellow tones in, and basically I just pumped up the colors in all cases. Just do a slightly more saturated version. And then that one has metallics. So that's what those swatches are. But after this, we'll be able to swatch the underpainting swatches. Just gonna swap out my card and zoom a little. Oh, but I guess I need to prepare my paint. So I shook everything beforehand. But I wanted to be able to share the paint colors that I'm using. So the darkest color I'm going to use is walnut brown. I don't think I'm going to go down to black. It's going to be hard to cover over black and have any effect with a transparent color. And if I end up needing that later, I can put the shadow over the underpainting. You know, I can add adding shadows is not the hardest part of anything. So I will do that. I did want to choose colors that had pretty good coverage. I mean, that'll make this easier. Actually, I don't 100% remember if this Dungeon Gray has really good coverage, but we'll assume. And I might have to make some transitions in between. In this case, I do want a fairly... I want some options. Because I'm going to be painting different objects, different values to help distinguish them between one another. So I'm not... Oh, I think this paint is kind of not sufficiently mixed. So I'm going to have to put it back in the bottle and try again. So just as with the vampire that I showed you, I don't want it to be like a zenithal highlight where gravity, all of the highlights and shadow, the contrast range is essentially the same over the whole figure. You're just deciding this place is a focus of attention of the light, but everything's kind of the same range of dark to light. With the vampire, you can see that his skin is much lighter. I don't go as dark as the black shadows. And then the cloak is the opposite. It doesn't go as light as the colors that were used on his skin or his shirt. So I can use the monochrome idea, but still have a range of values that you would have with real color. I guess if you were painting the standard way where it's like, okay, I chose this color for the face and I chose this color for the pants. But instead of having to choose 400 different colors for all the pouches and bibbles and baubles, there are a lot of bibbles and baubles on that figure. So this is a good tabletop speeding it up a little technique, I believe. Because if you have been here before, you know that monochromatic figures are the only ones that I have managed to paint in one stream session and complete. Well, I need to maybe add my water collection. I've got like a whole bunch of brushes because in continuing with the idea of making this more tabletop quick paint friendly, I want to see if I can get the brushes to do some of the work of adding different textures and whatnot. Wow, that gray is quite a bit warmer than the other one. Warmer and lighter. So even though I have those little swatches on my bottles, I don't always know exactly what I'm getting until I get it over my palette. And I will show you the palette range in a moment. do want a slightly more opaque color because it is a lot, I mean, it's a range of colors, but I want on the more opaque side, partly for speed, but also because painting textures is actually, this is one of those things, like, you know, everybody, sometimes people think, well, a good paint is this opacity, and we want to paint quickly, so we want all the paints to be very opaque, and then it's frustrating when yellow or, you know, green or whatever isn't. And certainly there are applications where opaque does make it easier, 100% true. But then the next stage I'm going to do where I put the color over, transparent is going to make it easier. And if I were doing, you know, blending more traditional way, semi-transparent paints would make it easier. So it kind of depends on what you want to do and how you like to paint. So this is the range of warm grays that I have selected, and I may be missing a step. I may have too many. I don't know. I may have to water down some of these ones with white a little bit. I think I'll just go ahead and do that preemptively. I'll put just a scooch more water in my wet palette, because I find it does tend to dry out when I'm doing videos. And then let's see what we can do to speed through this miniature. All right, so I want to go ahead and do the wood this way as well, I think. Hello, focus on the lady. Go. Now I can't see my brushes. This is, I ended up, did I? Yeah, no, I gave up on painting the hands last time because we were painting interior things and that just seemed like it was going to be too difficult. Why is there a little light colored thing right there? So I'm going to get my blue liner out just in case I have any deep recesses or lining that I need to fix. So how are you all doing? What have people been up to? We've been having very nice weather, which is somewhat suspicious because you feel like it's going to have to, we're going to have a little blast of winter before we can be totally done with winter. Maybe I was trying to paint that part, because technically you can see a little bit of her shoulder plate on this side, and on the fancy one I did paint it, but I'm not going to paint that here. That would be not in the interest of time. So I think I went with kind of lightish color woods. Do just for a middle color. Because I will admit that something I haven't really tried with this technique is doing the washes in the monochrome or the underpainting colors and then still just glazing one color over everything. So I don't know if that will work on the wood or not. But this wood, it may not be visible with this camera, which you may know vexes me, but there is a wood texture sculpted onto this spear haft. Not being very good about keeping my lining with the spear head. Maybe I didn't do enough anyway, so that's fine. There is not a wood texture sculpted on this. I ended up adding that in myself last time, and maybe we'll see if I can add it in this time. Carrie Michael Cosby is doing some slow painting while she watches. Quindy, it's the day before Mardi Gras, so hardly anyone is here at the office, and the end of the day cannot arrive soon enough. Oh, do you live in New Orleans? Or Louisiana? Or I don't know. Where this event is observed, I guess. That looks like a part that should be wood. So this, I'm going to start this one darker and maybe paint on some of those wood grain things the way I did with the other one. It won't be as fancy, but that is fine. So this is what I mean about the difference between painting each object with an underpainting compared to doing something like zenithal priming or slap chop or whatever that's overall. I can choose that this is going to be much lighter in value than this. So the lightness and value isn't determined by this is the direction I sprayed from. It's determined by me making that choice. I did very dark leather for a few areas on the other one, and I think that I made good choices for that. Because we're getting into stuff that maybe isn't the story of the miniature. Like, the story is that she is carrying too much crap, but we don't have to have the same detail and investment in every piece of the crap to grasp that story. And here we find a place where, you know, there were pants here that I should have painted, but we're just going to cover that with blue liner. Who cares? Lucky for me, those pants are blue, so it's not going to be too obvious. I was trying to figure out how I felt. I posted the pictures of the web store one that I did for Ron just yesterday, actually, because I posted the video and there's pictures of it in the video. Anyway, boring story. And one of the responses to it was that the person didn't care about anything else. They just thought the NMM axe was so cool, which on the one hand is a compliment, but on the other hand, it's like, well, is that really where I should have been having you look? Or did I actually kind of do too much on that axe and it's stealing focus? Just cleaning up another spot that should just be dark. And that's just this weird focus is this thing that I'm still working on. It's trickier than I realized. Because it's like, okay, so you want to show you can paint well, and you want to do this, and you want it to be realistic. But then with all of those things, you still have to consider, okay, where am I asking people to look? And that's something where the zenithal approach works really well, because you can choose that. This is the place that's the most important, and you have the light brightest in that area, and then everything else is going to be of lesser importance because it's going to be lower in value. Where with this way, I have to try to make choices that work with what I want the focus to be. And I do not always make great choices. This gray is just a little more transparent, I think. Oh, and I never did tell you the colors. So walnut brown is the darkest one. Dungeon gray is pretty dark as well, so that's one of my shadow colors. Then we've got Gug Umber, which is one of the Pathfinder, and I've been using several of the Pathfinder paints on this miniature. This is Stone Gray, one of my faves. Aged Bone, Skeleton Bone, and just white. I had trouble kind of, like, I was like, do I want to go even more, like, warm beige kind of colors, taupe, for the highlights? And you don't, when you're doing a monochromatic, you don't necessarily have to, the color can shift a bit. So I've seen people do, you can make like a nice gray by mixing a color like ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, so like an orangey red. And I've seen people use that as a thing. So you'll have like lighter colors being either cool and then warmer colors darker colors warm, or vice versa. It doesn't always necessarily have to be like just a range of it's white to black with grays in between, or it's like sepia tone or whatever. That's probably an easier way to start, but it doesn't have to be like that. Quinty does live in a suburb of New Orleans and does not go to the parades anymore, but has a free day off tomorrow. Just had enough parades in your life now. It's at a certain time. It's not as much fun as it used to be. We've been watching the Mayfair Witches, which they actually did film in New Orleans and not just pretending that it was New Orleans. And that has been, like, at first I was like, oh, did they go make this old falling apart house on a stage, or is this real? And it turns out it is real. It's actually down the street from where Anne Rice wrote the book. They never, none of the articles specified why. They were all like, well, it wasn't possible to film in Anne Rice's house. And I feel like it wasn't possible to film in Anne Rice's house because Anne Rice didn't want them to. But they never really specified why. I think the interiors, which was kind of actually the part I was wondering about, because it had this cool molding and neat wallpaper and stuff. That is the part I was sort of wondering if it was the real deal or not. And I get the impression that that part was a soundstage. I don't want the sole of the shoe to be as light. I mean, partly because that's, her foot is going to be blocking a lot of the light. So that, even if that underside was the same exact type of leather, it should appear darker because there is not very much light getting in there. We'll even go darker down where there's even less light. But I may go around the edge. I don't know why. I like to paint the heels of shoes and boots sometimes as being a different color or different leather than the main area. Just a thing that I like to do. So some of these places that are going to be harder to reach, even though I might want them to be lighter value, I'm going to paint them a little bit darker because I'm not going to want to mess with shadows. I'm going to want to, or at least not much mess with shadows. I'm going to want to work up from my darkest to my lightest. So I need to have the darkest there. And I can do the same thing I was doing last week where I go ahead and establish some of the shadows and lights, like from this stage, from the base coat stage. But I think I only want to do that on things that I will be painting as fairly smooth. Because like I said, the opacity helps a lot with building up textures. Like if I've had frustration where I want to use a color that happens to be kind of transparent and it's not working to build up textures because you can't see it well enough. So when that does happen, you probably just want to add a little white. Like either choose a different color or add a little white or something. I feel like, let's take a look. Yeah, I think I made that the same leather color as, I guess these aren't boots. They're some kind of shin armor. But making this dark will make that little circle of metallics pop even more where the clasp is. It also will make it easier for me to just kind of ignore stuff if I can't reach it. And that is one reason that all the straps are definitely going to be pretty dark. They might be maximally dark. And I did this exact same thing on the other one, because there are places where I cannot really reach the straps, realistically speaking. So just having it be fairly dark, and then you just can't see in there, seemed like the easiest way to handle that problem. I might wait to paint that one until later, though. I'll make the bow the lighter wood as well. This also does not have wood texture sculpted, and I added that on the Reaper version. Well, by which I mean that one belongs to Reaper. Which means I do have to fix the boo-boo, alas. I mean, I guess I should fix the boo-boo anyway, but I'm kind of terrible about going back and fixing miniatures if they have incidents after I have finished them. I have a little, triage ward of things that have been waiting for treatment for, these many, many years. I keep telling myself someday I'll glue that guy's arm back on. I don't know if it's staying in focus or not. Okay. There will be areas that need second coat, or at least little spot checks. I think for most of this, I actually did kind of go with use the darkest value, but since I'm kind of, making the value judgments up as I go, there are things that I may need to adjust to make something look more different than its neighbor, while remembering that I will also have color as a tool, since I will have color as a tool. Value is not the only tool that I will have. But I will be focusing on reds and yellows to stay within the color scheme. We kind of did blue on the metallics. Though I did have one, I made this blue, and I may do that here. I did not paint the little bedroll with this method on the other one, so I think it'll be interesting to do that on this one. And some of these straps will have to just wait until later, I think. And then the rope is interesting because this is pretty much the kind of color that I used to paint the rope. So I will probably just paint it and not put other color over it. This seems like a solid rope type color to me. And I'm going to paint this the same value as that quiver so that we can kind of explore how color can make the contrast as well. I do want to get dark in these little recesses. That should be very dark, I think. Since it's so recessed, it's just going to make my life easier if that's very dark. But I will wait and paint the rope because there's also rope here, and it'll just be more efficient to do it later, but it does look like it would be hard to paint that without painting this package, whatever it is. Awesome treasure that the adventurers have found, I'm sure. Then it occurs to me that maybe I should paint like the whole of things. Like the top counts too. Which is likewise true of this bow. The top counts too. Which is not to say that I never do that while painting, even when I'm concentrating and not having to talk at the same time. I hopefully do it a little less than I used to, but I definitely still have moments where like I finish and I take the pictures and I'm like, oh, look at this part that wasn't painted that should totally be painted. I guess I'll go fix that before I finish taking the pictures. It is annoying if I don't notice it until after I've taken the pictures, because that's like a whole other section of work. So it's like if I have to redo that part, I tend to get annoyed. Which is also why I like that Ron doesn't make me make changes very often. He's usually either I've completely disappointed him by choosing an inappropriate color and he chooses to live with it or ask me to paint a totally new one, or he just lives with what I did. I will have to come back and clean that up, but the color that I'm using on the bow needs 2 coats anyway, so that is fine. See here, I didn't even finish painting the side of this. Apparently I'm very distracted today. Let's see. Quindy has never been one for crowds, so has never really loved the parades. I mean, if I ever visit, I would like to go see it. I'm generally not a person for crowds either, but it would be fun to have the, entire experience for someone who doesn't live there. But I'm sure if you've been exposed to that for a long time, you're like, whatever. Been there, seen that. So now I have an interesting question. This is going to be pretty light. This is pretty dark. This is kind of dark. It's like, what color do I paint this? Like, I'm running out of values. But I do have to remember, I also have color. So I think that's what happened here. These were probably initially painted the same. And I think I didn't actually put a glaze on that part. I think though that one represents the colors that I actually painted a lot of the accessories before I put color over them. But here I'm doing that with the rope. So I will have to make that some kind of color. But we'll do that same thing. We'll make all of these things right here the same value and discover whether hue is enough. Hue and texture, because we can texturize. And that is another kind of contrast. Like, value is the most impactful kind of contrast, the thing that we notice the most readily, that our eyes are drawn to, is differences in value. Places where something really bright is close to something really dark. Those tend to draw our eye. But when we talk about things need more contrast, as miniature painters, we tend to focus on, darker shadows and brighter highlights. But it also means stuff like this. It means, can I distinguish this item from this item? That is something that contrast does. It's not just, did I make the shadows in that part dark enough or whatever. And that's one of the things that can be really challenging if you've been getting comments about contrast if you come to something like ReaperCon, which I understand that the hotel rooms went up this weekend, and now we're probably gone, but they'll have the secondary hotel as well. I painted these to match the straps, so I will do that here as well. So this is even blue liner. I'm going dark. And that is what I did on the straps too. And then on the other one, I actually just added, I added this to blue liner, just made my own transitions. So that it was just a little, it was like a cooler color and just a little bit blue. So that helped it stand out from the other leather as well. And then really this should be leather. And I'll make it that same super dark. Which I probably won't, you know, mix the blue liner thing again. We'll just try to fake it with the glazes. Where do I need to do a little more? So I still have the question of what to do with that. Painting it the way I painted it on the Reaper Store one is not a viable quick paint option. Because the way you get little lines that look like this is you paint little lines for a long time, which, so I get a brush like this, or even smaller tip, and and then I'm building up all the colors, so I might get the next color up and do the same thing. And then if I want cross hatching, which I did in this case, I have to turn it so that I can make a perpendicular stroke, and just keep doing that forever. Which I mean, obviously it requires brush control, but I don't find it stressful. Like, I'll put on something in the background. It's just a question of if I have the time to do that. If I don't have the time to do that, it would be stressful. And there are like kind of fake it ways. You just don't do as many, you know, you accept that it's not going to look as realistic or polished or whatever. And you don't do as many steps. So maybe I'll try that. I don't know. Goofs to cover up. I think this is the Gug Umber, and this is just kind of an umber thing. It's a great color. There's Bone Shadow that was, now I think Bone Shadow got canceled, which I loved, but it had a similar thing where it wasn't super opaque, but it was just this like really awesome color for many things. I like this kind of color for parchment and horn and stuff like that. Not always. Like, I like the yellowy ivory kind of thing, but just sometimes I might want a less yellowy. Or I have horn and parchment and, you know, bone or whatever, and I don't want them all to look identical. Then I can break out those different ones. So I have a more yellowy ivory for one thing, and more of a warm gray one for another thing. So that's another way of doing contrast. That's more hue. So value is the contrast thing that draws our eyes the most. Hue, which is like color family, essentially. So whether it's a red or an orange or a yellow, but it can still be like a red-brown. The hue is still, you know, kind of in the red family. We tend to go with hue. Like, our instinct as painters is to emphasize hue contrast. So to pick really contrasting literal colors when we're trying to make one thing stand out from another thing. And then we often forget about value. So if those two colors are both similar in value, they're not going to stand out as much. Like for the store one, the blue and the pink are closer in value than on this one. So this one, the pink shirt really stands out more. Partly because it's a brighter hue, but also because it's a lot lighter than some of the surrounding things. If that makes sense. Right, that needs more of this. Some of these warm grays aren't most opaque either, which is unfortunate because I love them, but I love them enough that I put up with it. I was having a moment with the tricky part of doing a monochromatic painting, which is remembering kind of which one of these pools of paint is this section. When I teach my monochromatic class, I recommend people, like we usually do it on foam plates, and I recommend that they write the number down, like number the various colors, and then like even if you're having trouble keeping track, like you write down, okay, I did the shirt at number 3 and the whatever else at number 7 to help you remember, because it takes a while to build an eye for value. It's easier to see when it is like grays, but we often don't do a great job of, is this pink actually lighter than this blue in value? It might not be. I might be wrong because I don't always do that well at seeing value comparing colors either. And then I think I never painted the inside of this pouch mouth. I'm going to do that. I want to get this little bit of strap behind here, since I will never get there again without messing something up. And there are some places where the gray is peeking through, and I'm actually just going to leave it because if I'm adding texture to things, it's okay if a little texture got added that way, in my opinion. Particularly for, if you're trying to do it quicker. So I'm going to leave that giant sack for now, because if I don't get there, maybe I will paint it the hard way next time. And we can see who's here because they have trouble sleeping, and they'll be very relaxed by the repetitive wonder of painting the lines forever. All right, I was going to do a wash over that. So let me get a little bit of paint. I'm actually going to do it with the blue liner. Just to add, make it a little cooler. Temperature is another kind of contrast variation that you can have, like warm things versus cool things. That's one reason that the pink and red, or the pink and blue are popping a little bit here, is because the blue is cool and the pink is warmer. And then all of those things I was talking about with contrast, you can use within your shadows and highlights. So absolutely having value contrast is very important, but you can accent the value contrast by making your shadows cool and your lights warm. Or having, if you're painting red, you can use green in the shadows. If you're painting yellow, you can use purple in the shadows, and you've got that complementary, contrasting color thing working in your favor. So that is the only thing I have with convenient built-in texture, I think. Now it is on me. So I'm trying to remember, I think I did the pouch, which I actually did before I did all of this stuff, so this should be fun because I didn't do that this time, with this stipple brush, which this is actually a bristle hair brush that you would normally use in oil painting. But I thought it would be fun to do some texture with that. The problem being that now I was kind of a dummy. And I should have painted that before I painted anything else, but I did not. So I will have to try to not gunk up. I mean, I haven't painted the other things, so it's not that big a deal. I also have the more popular kind, like, so we've been using these dome style brushes, but usually it's a softer hair. And actually, this one is a slightly rougher hair. I think it's, I was wondering if that might aim better, but I don't think it does. What else have I got? That one. I guess I should actually, according to the internet, it's better to not make your dry brush too dry and actually kind of like rub the extra off on some textured thing. I have not tested enough to decide if I agree with the internet on this, but it seems plausible. I use a wet sponge for my regular brush on a similar principle, so. But I have a piece of paper towel here just in case. Now I want to try being a little more precise and bringing out areas that are more upwards facing and not get this too much into the deeper crevices. And I'm not stressing too much about if the contrast is over exaggerated because a color goes over here. So that's going to tone it down a little. In fact, if anything, I want to over emphasize contrast because it's going to get dulled down, and I have to remember that it's going to get dulled down. So nothing is going to be quite as light or as dark as it is at this stage if I use the other colors over it. And I will add a little bit of shadow back because I didn't worry too much about aiming because this part it's easy to add stuff back in these little crevices. I will not paint the straps on that yet, I don't think. Alright, so this one, what are we doing with this one? So I'll start with this, since this is very inset. I'm going to start with that. Is it time to zoom in a little more? See if that works. So this, because it is so deep, I'm going to go ahead and add even, I based it in walnut, but I'm going to use some of the blue liner to add some additional shading and definition because that's really, it's really overshadowed. It's not going to need a lot of anything to start looking, you know, to bring out the shape. Lord Dave, hello. How are you? Here's where I may regret that some of my umber colors aren't as opaque, but I can use the lighter colors and then tone it down if I have to. I'm not really going for like a super defined texture, just sort of a, this thing seems to see some wear and tear, so there are a few little edges and whatnot that show up a bit more. But when you talk about focus, this one pouch that's like under a bunch of other things is definitely not the main area of focus on this miniature. So I just have to kind of distinguish the shape enough for the viewer to be able to go, oh, that's like a leather bag. Great, and move on. If they were even looking that close in the first place. All right, now this mysterious package is probably like awesome treasure that the adventurers found and are making her carry around. She's getting a little more walnut brown. I did not have a very big pool of it in the beginning, so it is drying out. I'm also going to add some more shadow here. Help bring out this kind of rounded rectangle. I'm sure there's a name for that shape that I'm not thinking of because math is not my thing. Well, the geometry I feel like was like the least, at least the lower levels of geometry were like the least painful of the math for me. And I know that it's got actual like textured rope. It's not just, so this is more like a string or twine or something, I guess. And this is like, this here is similar to this, and I will paint it at the same time. And that's going to be fairly light in color, so I don't want to go too light in this. I'm going to worry less about the, you know, shadow highlight contrast and more about the, let's contrast these two materials. Oh no, Lord Dave is in charge while Quindy goes to the bathroom. And he's unwilling to accept this level of responsibility. So we can all go nuts. And what is it Quindy doesn't like us to do? I don't even remember. Because I'm allowed to swear, I think. I'm not allowed to show you nipples. I don't mean mine. I meant the miniatures. And that's fine because she's very well dressed. And she's overloaded with things. So there's no risk of that. I can't remember what else I'm not allowed to do here in Twitchland. And I'm guessing Quinny isn't going to tell me when she gets back because she doesn't want me to know what I'm not supposed to do. Though that could go wrong the other direction, I guess. I could accidentally do the thing I'm not supposed to do. Because some of the Twitch rules are not very intuitive, in my opinion. Oh. Hello, focus. Did the wash on the thing dry? And I think it did. So let's dry brush that a little. He'd come up with a better way of testing dry brushing load than doing it on my thumb. In the meantime, I'll do it on my thumb. Yeah, that needs to go lighter, I think. But here I want to start thinking about where the light is actually coming from, not just trying to bring out the texture. I'm trying to suggest light. So I don't want to put it on the area that's facing towards the ground. And I think that's enough to suggest wood texture. And I might not even have to glaze over that. That's kind of an interesting old wood color. Maybe just a little hint of a lighter or warmer brown. Alright, where am I? Let's make this just a little darker because I missed the wash there apparently. Oh, I did actually mean to do the stones, but maybe I will finish the feet and then we'll come back to that. But I said I would try to do wood grain by hand on this part. The nice thing about wood grain is that the lines are not, you know, strictly parallel. They kind of meander. So if you don't have the steadiest hand, wood grain is a nice thing to practice because you want it to meander a little. And I feel like I'm having that opacity problem and that is not showing up enough. So let's kick it up a notch. And this is pretty much how I painted the other one, other than I think I used the colors that I intended. I didn't glaze over it for the bow and the axe haft. But here, since I am going to glaze, I can kind of exaggerate a little and not worry as much. It should get dialed back a bit from the glaze. Now this is more of a bloop that I don't like, and that would still show up, I think. But maybe we're just living with the bloop. That's fine. Now I try the same thing on the bow. But there, so if you're looking at her and the light is here, you know, coming from somewhere up here, this part of the bow is sloping down a bit. Not, you know, as extremely as that, but it was sloping down a bit. So I could use darker lines to make more of a shadow thing. I'm not sure this is 100% my best brush for this. Yeah, I don't think it is, but that's okay. Because I'm supposed to be doing the more chill version. So. And sometimes adding a mix of darker and lighter lines can help make a wood texture easier to do or more convincing. So that was that color. So yeah, let's try this. It might be too much, but hopefully not. Or maybe it won't be enough. I don't know. That's a bit better. Yeah, the paint, enough paint on the brush. Where'd that other end go? There we go. And then this part is also poking out. And that's kind of how a mix starts working, where you have lighter and darker together. Maybe we take all that darker, come up here and put that in a few places. And then do some even lighter. Just a little bit down here as well. I'm not as worried about the whole focus idea on the back because her face isn't there. So I can kind of just choose which stuff I think is the most interesting and make that the focus. All right, for this thing. Just have to bring out the sculpted thing that Bobby very kindly did for us. And call that good. Other than I will go ahead and do the blue liner parts now. These ridges, bands, I guess would be more accurate, will be metallic, but that's going to be like an end thing because there's a couple little places like the buckle and these. Oh, and her, whatever that is on her shoe. Let's just cover up whatever's happening in there that I don't feel like painting. Sorry, I'm flipping around a lot, but that is actually kind of the secret of, well, not, I don't know if it's the whole secret, but it's certainly a secret of making precision painting a bit easier, is if you are repeating the same stroke over and over again, instead of twisting your brush hand all around, twisting the miniature around so that you can do that as much as possible. Makes it easier to paint precisely. I mean, clearly not perfectly easy because I just got that wrong. But I see that I only painted one armband and she has two. So let's slap the blue liner on that. The bow. Yeah, let's do the scabbard when we're here. Nah, I'm gonna do the scabbard and the boot thingies at the same time. Yeah, all right, I'll do it now. Whatever. Hey, the real brush guy. Twisted Domo was asking if this is one of the new printed miniatures. Yes, this is Marina, the overladen henchwoman. So I painted the. If you go to the reapermini.com, This is the one you'll see up, and I'm kind of doing a quick tabletop version. Well, not for me, it's a quick paint. For a regular person, this is probably taking way too long to be a tabletop miniature. But the way that I'm doing this underpainting thing, where I'm painting all of these accessories with the same range of colors, and then I'm going to glaze them afterwards, is how I painted a lot of the accessories on the store one. Because I don't normally accept painting things that have this much crap on them, but the one time I don't ask Ron for a picture, this is what he sends me. And I thought, well, hey, I can do that thing that I know saves some time. And I'm painting all the straps with liner, partly to make my life easier, which I also did on the real one. So for this one, I'm basically just trying to, do some of the textures a bit more quickly, doing more of the things with I'll paint everything the same color and then make it look like different colors later. I'm painting more items that way than I painted on the original. I'm also trying to, so I use the same overall color scheme. This is a yellow, red, blue triad. Pink counts as red, and she's got, her skin has a lot of yellow in it, and then a lot of the browns that I used, like the glaze color I used for some stuff was this, so that's nice and yellow in the context of this especially. But I wanted to pump it up a little. I do think a little more saturation and a little more lightness on her clothes would be more effective for something that would be looked at on a table. Then the way I painted the other thing that, there's nice close-up pictures of, which actually allows you to get some things wrong more than painting for tabletop distance does. Because that whole value difference thing is way more important. It is important for display miniatures. People sometimes think that it is not, that you only need contrast in tabletop miniatures, and that is not true. But it's probably even more important in something that you're going to be looking at more of a distance. All right, is my umber separating now on top of... So the umber being a little bit transparent is becoming a pain, but I just go with the... I think I stirred it and that helped. So here I'm just kind of going for a... This is leather that has had adventures type of thing. So it's going to be a texture. I did kind of do this on the original one, I think. And then wherever it looks like it really had adventures, I can just add in, like right there, that looks like, here looks like slashes. But I'm going to do a little more of kind of just the general, somewhat random stroke thing. And then find those spots. So here I'm trying to simulate both the way leather might wear, like the areas where it's going to wear more, and the type of texture that it might have from wear, but also keep in mind, where the light is and focus it there. And I'm not going to put a lot of that texture back in the crevices, because things that are shadowed, you don't see detail of texture as well in those. And that's interesting that it looks way starker. And this is the problem with mixing opaque, or that you'll often have with highlighting, is like everything seems like it starts looking a lot more, you get those stark transitions or chalkiness or whatever people are calling it. And I do want some, here I'm not trying to make a nice smooth blend, so I do want some of that. I just want to make sure that it doesn't look like, oh, you just used the brush like that here and you didn't use the brush like that there. and some scratches, because I don't know if it shows up on the camera, that there are like some places where she got slashed while she was running away from whatever the adventurers had scared up, or something along those lines. And you want there's a dark line, and then there's like a light line from the direction of the light to do a scratch. So I'm looking for places where it kind of already seemed like it was starting to do that, and just accentuating them. Okay, I'm not going up light enough is why that's not working. Then I do want to make sure that this seam, wherever this is filled in a little. And I goofed it, but I used the finger erase, and hopefully that will just end up looking like more texture difference in the end. I do want to shove some shadows down in here, because I don't intend on taking much effort in there. Maybe I'll return to the feathers in a minute. So this is another item that I'm going to add shadows to, like go even darker. So my general darkest for the whole monochromatic underpainting sequence is walnut to white with a bunch of grays in between. But I want this to be a pretty dark item, so I'm using some thin down blue liner in a few places. I don't like this. It shouldn't look as worn as this, at least to me. Partly because they're right adjacent to each other, but also because I'm sort of copying what I did before. So I want it to look like a little worn, but not like literal battle worn. But mostly I'm just trying to bring out the shapes a little bit. And this guy was lighter, but can have a little more shadow. Some of these pouch wrinkly things. But the rest of the pouch wrinkles will end up looking darker by virtue of lighter paint going on around them. And oh, that looks like kind of like a money pouch or something. So I will make it a little more, a little brighter, partly just to distinguish it from things around it. And I don't think it's going to compete with her face, because I did use, you know, these more saturated colors and whatnot. All right, what is left? I think we are down to the scabbard and the shoe part of the shoes. I don't completely understand her outfit, but that is fine. I mean, I guess this is armor. And in the first one, just to have more contrast, I made them both a different hue. So they're yellow. They're like the yellow leather, and the leg armor part is the red leather. But I also did a fair kind of value shift between them. I don't want the feet to become the focus of attention. But I do want to distinguish these as two different leather surfaces. So I'll add a little bit of shadows here so it doesn't become too bright. This is another one of my somewhat transparent numbers, which is fine for shadows, I guess. Oh, we had a whole conversation going on in chat. Wendy's weekend was too short. Twisted Domo is, holy crap, it's 80 degrees. That's a lot. That's a lot. And it's 78 where Quindy is. It's been pretty warm here. I mean, people's flowers are coming up already, but I very much expect a reversal of that, and that some of the trees and flowers will regret what they have done. Hopefully not too many, because I like it when we get lots of nice flowers, and sometimes if there's like a real cold snap after they've already started, then that kind of messes them up. Just looking for shoe wrinkles. And here again, I want to think about both where is the light and where do shoes get a lot of wear, and the answer to both those things is toes. So I usually like to get some good highlights on the toes. And then a bit here, you'll get scuffs on your heel. This foot is more, it's going to be getting a lot less light, so I probably won't go as light on that foot as I will on this one. But this heel is getting light, so come back to that. Yeah, since we're gonna cover things over a little bit, I will go even lighter on this toe. And this heel. If I wanted, I could do the thing where I'm looking for places that I kind of made naturally look like dings and dents and whatnot, but it's the feet. They're not the main story, so I'm not going to go too crazy doing that. I think I did do it a little bit on the other miniature. I'm just stirring my paint some. I'm having like a weird separation thing today. Which is partly weird because it's not like I mix most of these. Most of them just came right out of the bottle. I'm putting blue liner shade on the parts that are really obscured from the light. Because I wanted these to stay pretty dark, and I had the same experience on the other one where, I had to kind of make do with not having a lot of contrast on this section, which is fine. I mean, if there's going to be a section that's not highly contrasted, this is a good one. So really, there's just some texture implied in places where you can see it well enough you know, where there's enough light falling on those areas to see it. I need to not be too restrained here because I'm going to be covering this over with glazes, and even though that's like super thin down paint, it does take away some of your contrast. I kind of have to take it to where I want it and then just beyond. And if you're tentative with contrast and you haven't, you know, you've been getting a lot of criticism that you don't do enough, you got to take it to where you want it, take it to beyond just in general. And then in a situation like this where I know I'm going to dull it down, you got to go way beyond. That is how you start pushing your contrast. Actually, I almost feel like go the other way. Like go make it ridiculous. Just make something you think people are going to be like, oh my gosh, this OSL is way over the top. This, you know, general contrast or whatever is insane. And wait and see if anyone actually says that. Because chances are they won't, and you haven't gone nearly as extreme as you think you have. But I think you might get to where you need to be faster that way than, you know, slowly inching up. Okay, well, that still wasn't enough. That still wasn't enough. And you just add a little bit more and a little bit more, and you try and get comfortable with it or whatever. My advice now is don't do it that way. It takes forever. That's how I did it. Don't be me. Just go nuts. And until someone tells you went nuts, well, probably more than one person too. Until at least one person, but probably more, tells you it looks nuts, it doesn't look nuts. I had meant to make these darker before I painted that other bit, but now I'll have to do this and come back to the feet. But it's not gonna, it's just like a little line to separate the heel from the depression, so it won't take much time. The question is more me remembering what I have to do. This is why sometimes when if I'm working on something that I'm really putting a lot of effort into, and I want it to look nice, like a contest entry, I do a couple of things. One is I try to let it sit for a few days, if not longer, and let it sit somewhere. I mean, you might want to even like not look at it for a while, but after a while, put it somewhere where you could look at it now and then, like you pass by, and think about whether you're happy with everything, or if there's something that's kind of just nagging at you. It's like, oh, I just don't quite like this bit here. And as you find those parts and continue, you know, passing by, looking at it now and then, think about what specifically you don't like. Like try to identify what's not working, so you can try to figure out what you need to fix. But then the other thing that I find helpful to do is to take pictures before they're the final pictures, and then I blow them way up, and I get a pen and paper and I write down everything that sucks or that I want to change or whatever. So it'll be like, I mean, sometimes it's very specific. It'll be like, okay, the blend on this cheek isn't great, or I missed painting the back of the arm. Like sometimes it's like I forgot to paint lipstick. Go back and do that. But often it's just the blend doesn't look good here. This part needs more texture. This needs a little more contrast. Again, this is for contest entry. I wouldn't do it on this figure. This is going to be metallic, so I just want to get the lining around that so that I don't have to worry about crevices. Because really, I don't want the metallic to show in the crevices anyway, because that's a shadowed part. Sometimes I forget which foot I'm on. these two. Because there, so people think lining is really artificial. There would be a line of shadow from this object overhanging this object. Like if you look at something sitting on a table, you'll see a black or a darker shadow around the edge of the glass where it's meeting the table. That's what lining is duplicating. It is duplicating a real world thing. We sometimes exaggerate it or put it places where it might not happen that much because it is very helpful for adding definition and separation. But it's not this weird, artificially fake thing that a lot of people seem to feel like it is. I just want to get a little bit of wear and tear on the heels and then bring out this, like this little ridge where the sole of the shoe is, which honestly, if I were doing like a super quick version, I might not do that. But I don't know. Like I said, I like to have the heels, maybe not that contrasted. That's a little more contrasted than I normally do, but I like to have them like a little bit of a different leather type than the main part of the feet. Let's see, Lord Dave, I feel like all judge reviews are required to begin with. You need to bump up the contrast just as a starting point for feedback. The problem, which I was discussing earlier, is that we're not always great about separating out different kinds of contrast. So the thing I'm doing here, which maybe I'm not even doing that well here because I don't know that I 100% achieved it here, but let's look at the vampire. I did it well on the vampire. Is sometimes this contrast between areas thing. Sorry, that's a distracting little piece of metallic. This contrast between areas where his face is like really light and this is middle and these are dark. And having adjacent ones if you can sometimes to help make a focal point in particular. That's a very important kind of contrast. So we kind of get obsessed where if we think if something isn't popping, it's all about how dark are the shadows and how light are the highlights. And that really is just one kind of contrast. And it's even only one way to make shadow highlight contrast and make things look more three-dimensional. So we are bad at that. People are very tentative with, going dark enough in the shadows and light enough in the highlights and using the other kinds of contrast for those things. Because we feel like since they're three-dimensional, why are we having to do all that? But we are having to simulate what light would do to the objects. It's more like a 2D picture. If you've ever done any 2D drawing and you've like shaded an apple or something, it's more like that than it is this is a statue and I'm just adding color to it. But that kind of contrast helps. Contrast of hues helps. We were talking about those earlier. Knowing where, knowing the idea that I don't need a ton of contrast here because this is the feet, it's not the story. Maybe I need more here because there's got to be some stuff going on the back. I've got to distinguish these objects. I need to make sure that her face is the focus, so I need to make my choices in a way that if your story is if your story is something about the feet, like those do become the focal point, and you want to do the stuff there. And there are scenarios I can imagine where the story of your figure might be the feet. I'm not saying that as a goofy example. If you were painting like a soccer player doing a kick or something, the story of that miniature could be the feet. And it'd be perfectly reasonable to make all those choices that I normally talk about with the face for the feet. Lord Dave liked the monochrome vampire. That was my Halloween. Now, I've done 2 Halloweens streams now where I've painted monochromatically. Also, the only 2 streams that I've finished a miniature in one stream. So the first one was a Bonsylvanian, and it was kind of like a blue teal ghosty type thing. But last year that vampire had come out, and I thought we'd also just watched Werewolf by Night or whatever it's called. I thought that doing like old school black and white monochrome would be fun. But I'm essentially doing the same thing here, and then I'm going to add color, which I'm not doing to the vampire. I could, but I'm not going to, because he's kind of cool in the way he is. But we're going to add colors that distinguish these items more than they currently are, being all the exact same brownie gray. But this is one way, and I don't know if you do this, Dave, because you paint a lot more quick paint things than I do, but you can use like a monochromatic thing and then glaze over it. So I'm painting a bunch of stuff with the same color mixes, which for me is a huge time saver. And then I can add the color part later. Hopefully we'll get there. Well, I got half an hour, we'll see. Pendrake is asking, chat, what would be a good Terrain Tuesday question? And are you asking chat or me about duochromistically? And then tell me what duochromistically means. Do you mean like the highlights are one color and the shadows are another color? So you have like a... Because I was talking about how traditional painters sometimes will do this underpainting thing and they'll do mixes between like a cool blue like ultramarine and then a warm color like reddish orange burnt sienna, and you have like mixes between those two that make grays, but then you can also, you know, just have dark blues and do lighter colors for the reds, so you can do like a temperature difference as well. But by duochrome, is this like a specific kind of paint? Because I know there are color shifting paints. Or do you mean, have I painted a color shift using regular paints where it like looks like it goes from green to yellow or something like that? I don't understand what you mean by the term duochrome, I guess is what I'm saying. So I don't know whether I've done it or not. And stuff I should have decided earlier, I do want a real dark line there. All right, where did I... Did that, but it didn't get a dark line. Well, it did, but then I erased it, I guess. I think I painted over some of the bottom metal piece, forgetting that I had already painted that, but that shouldn't be too hard to get back. Where am I? Have I done all the bibbly bobs? I think I have, other than the base. Let's see if I can get that enough paint on that quickly to treat it the same way. And I will paint my shirt at the same time, apparently. This might be another area that I can just leave the color than it is, because I typically like to do a warm gray stone, but there's enough warm things on her that maybe I do want to shift this a little blue, because that's our other triad. That's our cool color in the triad, is the blue. And I do want to, you know, use the temperature and hue contrast to keep all of these very many different surfaces somewhat distinct from one another. Monochrome being one color, grays maybe sepias, duochrome would I suppose be using two colors on a medium instead of just one. So that would be like the burnt sienna ultramarine, which is not necessarily value linked, because you can have warm darks and cool darks and warm lights and cool lights in that scenario. Have I done that? I don't think so. I mean, I think the first Halloween miniature I did, I mean, I think it's like a little more green in the highlights and a little more blue in the shadows, but I don't think it's like a very strong thing. I've painted individual items that way. It can be interesting to do kind of a color shift thing. Green is a good one to do it with because you can use blue in the shadows and you can use yellow in the highlights, and you get kind of a like satiny color shifting cloth type of effect. But I haven't done it over a whole miniature. I actually don't do this underpainting thing that much. Either I do it and it's just a roadmap, and I'm actually going to paint over everything. I just want to figure out where my values go. So I'll often do that with primer even. So that I've done numerous times, and it was helpful to me to working on, improving my contrast and differentiating items and stuff. So I've done that a fair amount. I don't do underpainting a lot apart from that. I tried like color underpainting once, but it was like a lot of colors. I kind of called it barfing color up on the miniature with so many colors. I feel like I tried another kind of underpainting and I'm not remembering what it is. I mean, I've done true zenithal highlighting. It's not my favorite, but I've done it. And that was one reason that I chose these colors, because, I mean, grisaille, true grays are not the only way to do it. And those look like grays on screen, but let's look at the colors I did on the original miniature. I was trying to go for burnt umber, and I don't think I hit it, but I'm not unhappy with those colors, but I don't think it was burnt umber. So this was the color scheme on the original miniature that's on the reapermini.com front page right now. And these are the colors that I've been using on the figure I'm working on right now, other than I will add those little grays at the bottom just to have, keep both of these as a example of kind of two versions of the same kind of color scheme. That is still drying. But I can fix the straps while I'm here, because there should be just a little bit of something on some of the straps. Let's zoom back in though. Just pick out some edges and that kind of thing. Are their straps? Places I haven't painted yet. But I'm not going to be glazing these over anyway, so I can keep working on those and then do the glaze thing. Then I see now that I didn't actually make it to the rope, which is going to genuinely be this color, so that is funny. But we'll see. I still got a little bit of time. Can I make it? And the rope should be mostly a wash doing the work. Oh, I've gone totally out of frame. My apologies. I have done a sepia miniature as well, and it was kind of like this, where I didn't just pick one color and white and mix all the in between. I kind of picked out colors that were in the ballpark. So it might be that there were some saturation differences there too, that, some of the colors might have been a little more colorful than they would have otherwise been if done in kind of true monochromatic fashion. What? I'm probably forgetting some other part. Oh, I didn't finish all the straps. That's what I'm forgetting, because I hadn't painted all of them. And her armbands are that same feel like I want these edges to come out a little more. And the armbands, I did kind of make a little weathered, I think. You know, it's not easy working for a bunch of ungrateful adventurers. You get a little weathered. Is it a little weathered or is it too weathered? I don't know. So, is the base dry? No. Alright, I want to put a wash over that since I am going to just leave it as one coat. So yeah, let's start glazing. Let's do some glazing. So I have the same colors I used on the other one, and I definitely want to use the polished leather. That you can see, and this is why I do the thinning out thing in my swatches. You can see how much yellow there is in that. So it's brown, but it's brown with a real yellow bias. And it's also, this is annoyingly, when you're trying to use it as a base coat, a somewhat transparent color. I mean, semi-transparent. It's not like super transparent. But that property will make it a good candidate for doing this, where, while I like this kind of yellow ochre color and palomino gold, there's a couple other ones that are kind of in this family. These are pretty opaque, especially for yellows, and I would have to be a lot more careful about the thinning down thing. And then the other thing I was doing a little bit with this is I don't play a lot with the finish, the actual like finish or texture of paint as an element of contrast. There are certain painters who do. But if I thin some of these with brush on sealer or more brush on sealer than water, they will have a slight sheen that I think is kind of leathery. So I'm going to use that on the things that are supposed to be leather and not use it on the things that are supposed to be cloth. I'll use just straight water to mix the glazes through those. I could also, you know, do stuff later. Where is my paper with text? So this is definitely when you want to test with the paper with text, and then is when I remember that I've been meaning to go get a new paper like forever, and then every time I forget. So that might be a little strong, but we're gonna give it a shot. Hopefully I'm not about to cover over all my stuff. So where I did it on the shoes, and what else? A bit on the wood, but the wood I had painted a different way. So I'm going to want to change that color just a little. And I may have gone too light on the shoes, and the texture isn't going to show up that well, but that's okay. I will learn more for next time. So I feel like this yellow is too intense for the wood. So I want to add something to that. Let me first check if there's anything else I want to make. Oh, did I do the bow in the yellowy, or the quiver? Oh, that looks more orangey. More orangey red. I'll do it, and then we'll go over with the other colors here. So I can paint everything with one color, but make it start looking like another color. But what I want to do now is I want a duller yellow than that for the wood. Like, I feel like wood, there's a lot of gray to it. Like, we think of wood and trees and stuff as very brown, but there's a lot of gray in it. Actually, I did use this color as a glaze as well. So this is bruised purple. But if I mix a little bit of that into the yellow, I should be able to tone it down. Because yellow and purple are color complements. I toned it down, but did I also make it more opaque, which I very likely did. Put it next to it. So that was the original yellow, and this is the new color. And I can't see the text as well under that, so I'm definitely going to have to add more water. And I am going to use water because I'm going to put this on the wood, and I don't want it to be as shiny. This is why I test my glazes, because I just spent all that, I spent the whole rest of the show putting all that texture and shades and highlights and whatnot in. I don't want to cover it over with one pass of that color. So that is a lot more of a glaze-like consistency. And I may use some of that on the shadow areas of the shoes as well. So a little variation in whatnot. Not 100% loving how the shoes came out, but there's a certain risk with this approach that you aren't always going to love how it comes out. I mean, if I were doing this for something that I am putting a ton of time into, and I don't want to be like, okay, well, that didn't work as well as I hoped. Like, it works, but I don't love the color or whatever. I'll just remember that for next time. I would test this. I would have something where I had done, my test, did my transitions really rough and quick, and then test my glaze colors over that to make sure that they do what I want before I put it on the actual miniature. But that, I think, is definitely doing what I want. That's just adding a little bit of color to the wood, but keeping it very subdued looking. So I will do the same thing to this part of the wood. Which had like a different mix of the monochromatic colors, so it may come out looking a little different, which is fine. I haven't painted the hands yet, so I'm not. I attempted it, and then I realized that just as with the original miniature, it was not going to work out great for me to do it that way because of all the things that are kind of under that hand that is holding the bag. This is also wood, which I don't have to use the same color on it, but I'm going to choose to. Sorry. I put a palette in the frame, and the camera never likes when I do that. All right, so that's some yellow stuff. And man, that quiver looks weird, but let's see if we can fix it. Because I will now do, for the reddish browns, I chose Ready Leather, but then I'd forgotten what color I used. So I was looking at my colors later, or looking for colors to use today, and I feel like the chestnut brown might be better. But I guess it's interesting to kind of keep it the same so you can compare how it looks with two different undercoat colors. Since I used, that's way more of that than I used. Since I used a slightly different range for the underpainting, it was Still gray. I don't know. It was a different gray. Neither of them are neutral gray. But I will have to paint out after the show, I will paint out the thing on the card like I did, and we can look at that next week. Yeah, I think that's transparent enough. So that color I painted on the leg armor. I might have bumped it up a little with something later, though. I think I bumped it up with red oxide. I don't actually remember. I don't always think of what I need to take a note on when I'm painting to be able to talk to people about it later. Yeah, that's warmed it. I do think that something like the auburn or red oxide would be a little more effective with this color mix. Leave that the way it is. But this I want to be that same reddy brown. I forgot my thing about using more brush on sealer where I was painting leather things, so I think that one is just water, but whatever. It doesn't have to have a sheen from paint. It can all be from effects. But let's bump up the red. Because I did have this as well. I guess I probably used one of those. That's true. I forgot about that. But this is the red oxide that I have lost. Oxide red. There we go. So this is pretty opaque because those earth colors are kind of opaque, but I will just thin it down more after it finishes exploding all over the place. Don't know why that happened. Make a fresh pool in case that is not the right mix of binder to pigment. Make a miniature NASA swatch card to put in the frame to help with color balance. I use a grayscale card for taking my photographs of miniatures. My concern would be the same thing that's happening here, where if there's something lower down, the camera very often chooses to focus on that instead of the miniature. So I go with, this is a pretty neutral gray. So I use a neutral gray for the background. I mean, it's a little warm maybe. So that there's a frame of reference. I don't know if this camera, how advanced the color balancing system in it is. Like, I don't know if it really, there's no way to do a white balance to my knowledge. We have just a very few, we can turn a light on and off. I can do the day glow thing or get to black and white like I do sometimes. I can rotate it, zoom, add the exposure up and down, or make it focus. There's nothing for white balance or color shifting at all. And there's no, I don't think there's really software that controls it. It's pretty plug and play. Unless Anne has managed to do all of these things and I'm unaware of it. I think that's probably... It just seems like there are colors that look different on film. Like, even with people's good cameras, that seems like that happens sometimes. But oops, I do not want full strength paint. That would be very bad. This is kind of interesting because I accentuated the pink a lot more on this one. So I do have kind of a pink and red together in the same moment thing happening that's not as apparent on the other one, I don't think. Maybe that is why I put some of the pinks in the other one. I do not remember now. I will go on thinking that I'll remember stuff when the evidence dramatically proves otherwise. I don't feel like I want that orange on this. Like, I don't feel like that would solve the problem. I think I'm gonna thin the purple down and just use that straight up. That being bruised purple, it's not purple purple. It was purple purple, purple purple. I would definitely mix some of that yellow in there to make it more of a brown. But this is already starting out a smidge brown. I wasn't gonna do my test, but I do like to be sure before I mess stuff up. Yeah, it's maybe a little, needs one more drop. So by putting that over the yellow, it's going to be like a filter, sort of, I guess. But it should tone that yellow down and hopefully make it look a little richer. So I actually had not thinned my purple down too much because that's not even really hardly doing anything. But I would rather err in this direction every time and have to come and do this. Other than now I've lost my purple. How did I do that? There we go. So I would rather goof up in this direction and have to add more paint in or do multiple coats or whatever than cover a bunch of stuff over. Because then I have to paint all the texture and transitions and all that stuff over again. This part is much less time consuming. Yeah, I think that's helping. I can kind of add some more as another kind of shading as well. The glaze does not have to be all over. Spot glazing works too. And I'm remembering that we need to glaze a color I didn't glaze on the original one. I'm just adding a bit of lining and whatnot while I'm here. Because I just used blues to paint the little bedroll on the other one. But I wanted to try doing it with the glaze for speed's sake. So this is the Hobgoblin blue. It's dark, but it's a nice rich blue. Although maybe I might have my exposure bumped up a little too much. It doesn't look as dark on my screen. So it should work pretty well as a glaze color. Is today a Clever Crow Monday? Not to my knowledge, but hopefully Quindy has much more accurate knowledge than I do. She usually does. Nope. She says no. Alas. So yeah, it's funny how dark blues can actually be quite intense colors and you don't realize until you start thinning them out. I'm actually going to keep that not quite as thin as I would normally do. The texture is pretty exaggerated and I really want the color. I don't want just a hint of color like on some of these other things. I want it to actually look blue. Okay, but maybe not pool the blue. That is really the big difference between glaze and wash, is that glazes you don't allow to pool. You're putting an even coat of it over the surface, so it does act like a filter, camera filter, or whatnot. And I think that's all of the areas that needed color. So the challenge of this is if I wanted to go back and I'm like, okay, well, I lost some of my mojo here on the quiver. Like it's not the same color, so going back might be more obvious than I want it to be. You can do it anyway, because it's just scratch damage, and scratch damage would go below the level of the dye. But if it was more of a blend type of a situation, it'd be a little chancier to do that. And I didn't do the stone, but I think we're pretty much at time, so I might have to, didn't quite get there. I might have to finish up the rest next week, although I guess, is next week still going to be February? I don't know. But I guess even if it's not February, I can still finish painting the February miniature. But that's my little quick trick for if you want to paint a bunch of stuff a little more quickly on something you're trying to get on the table. Use like, grayscale or another monochromatic thing, and then you can add color on top. And you can go a lot, I'm keeping a lot of this gear fairly subdued because, it's not the focus. You can go lighter. I didn't even end up using any white. Like, I hardly touched these at all. But you can certainly do lighter values with this method as well. Just didn't happen to come up today. So let's get the other one. Well, there's the, oh, maybe I zoomed too much. There's the original one. And I think I do like the brighter, the lighter, I think it's the lighter value more than the saturation on the pink on her, and the more yellow in the face. I like that on the revised version a little bit more. I did not paint all of the areas that I did that way today on the original figure, so I didn't paint the wood. I didn't paint the wood that way. So there's a little, the color thing isn't going to be 1-to-1 on like some of those areas, but it's pretty close. I mean, I was shifting some of the colors anyway. But yeah, I think going a little lighter and more yellow on the skin was effective, but especially for like more of a arm's length context. But so I will probably try to finish her up, because then she can turn into another one of those where I can go through it and say, if you were at ReaperCon and this was your miniature, what would it look like if you did the stuff the judges tell you to do? But for now, I'm just going to leave it where we are and say goodbye. Pendrake confirms that it will still be barely February next Monday. So I think I can get away with working on her one more time. Unless it snows, and then I might go back to the snowman just to, be in keeping with the weather. You're welcome, Zachariah. I'm sure Quinny's going to find us a raid, so that even though we aren't going to be able to enjoy Crow's Nest today, we're going to be able to enjoy something that would appeal to people who like what we like, because Quinny's really good at this. So thanks for coming. Art of Mike Disney, say hi, and I'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.